Idea Brew Studios presents All Indians Matter in depth.
Hello and welcome to All Indians Matter. I am Ashraf Engineer. As right-wing forces get entrenched even more solidly in Indian politics and society, there is an attempt to change the way India perceives Mahatma Gandhi. Using modern communication tools and mobilization on the ground, there is an attempt to normalize the thinking of those who killed him and even to idolize them. Gandhi's death changed India's history as much as his life did. But despite what he means to India, most people have only a superficial knowledge of his killing. All Indians Matter seeks to change that through a series of conversations with Tushar Gandhi, Gandhi's great-grandson and president of the Mahatma Gandhi Foundation. Tushar is an activist and author who's fought to keep Gandhi relevant in today's India. His book, Let's Kill Gandhi, a chronicle of Gandhi's last days, the conspiracy, murder, investigations and trial, was sold out and will soon be re-released after fresh edits.
आज सुना अखबार तुम लोगों को कहीं भी चलता है ऐसे हम डर जाएंगे तो सचमुच यहाँ कोई हो जाए तो हमारा हाल कैसा होगा.
That was the All India radio clip of Gandhi's discourse, during which an attempt was made to kill him on January 20, 1948. You can clearly hear the bomb explosion and Gandhi exhorting the crowd to stay calm. The killers failed. 10 days later, they came back to the same place and almost at the same time succeeded in murdering Gandhi. January 20, 1948. That was the day of the first attempt on Gandhi's life, but it failed. Tushar, tell us about this attempt, how it happened, and why exactly did it fail?
Ashraf, one thing that I'd like to make very clear was that the attack on January 20th wasn't the first. There were previous attacks that had failed for a long time. There was a series of attacks that were happening which had failed. I'll describe those maybe a bit later, but you see, the January 20th attack was orchestrated in a very perfect manner for a long time. It had been in the works for almost the last whole year. Whenever Bapu was in Delhi and he was holding his evening public prayers, whenever he did the prayers from the Quran, the Muslim prayers, protests would happen against those prayers. And the attempt was made to show as if these were angry refugees who had been driven out of their homes from West Punjab and to the chants of these kind of sloganeering, and who could not tolerate Gandhi also doing the same prayers, and they were getting angry and emotional and they were protesting. And they were progressively getting more and more intense. As a matter of fact, there was one time when Gandhi was attempted to be attacked in that also, and in his subsequent boasts, Apte, who was the second accused in the Gandhi murder, had boasted in Pune that he and Nathuram Godse, Bapu's murderer, were involved in that protest and they had driven Gandhi away with their aggression. So the plan was that this would continue and culminate on 20th January when another refugee, Madan Lal Pahwa, who had come from West Punjab, in his anger and emotion, would explode a bomb and attack Gandhi. And in that confusion, the murder would happen and everybody would believe that a refugee had murdered. The reason that the attack failed was because these people were basically bunglers. They were a gang, very committed, but not at all professional in their acts. And so, because Nathuram developed a headache in the afternoon, the gang got delayed in leaving. Till the afternoon of the 20th, they did not even test out the guns. And when they tested out the guns that they had at that time, they realized that the bullets and the guns were of different calibers. They were not matching. And so the guns proved to be ineffective. At the last minute, they realized that the guns don't work. Badge realized that everybody else in the group had made good their escape because they were not going to participate in the attempt at all. The apparent participants in the attack would be Madan Lal, who would be seen to be the bomber, Badge, who would be seen to be the shooter, and Kishtaya, who was also supposed to shoot at Bapu, although he had an ineffective weapon. Badge was the weapons dealer from Pune. Kishtaya was his servant who didn't even know what he was supposed to do. He was just told to follow Badge's orders about an hour before the attempt. And so Badge, who was very shrewd, realized that everybody else would escape and he would be caught with a smoking gun proverbially. And so he chickened out at the last minute. Surprisingly, Vishnu Karkare, who was the third accused, who was the patron of Madan Lal Pahwa also, and a very staunch Savarkarite, was supposed to throw a hand grenade at Bapu to ensure that he was finished off after the explosion of the bomb. He didn't do it either. So none of them did what they were supposed to do on that day, and the cumulative effect was the attempt failed.
Why were the conspirators so angry with Gandhi in the first place, sir? Did it have something to do with his response to riots like the ones in Noakhali?
That was a convenient excuse to hang the reason or justify the murder of Gandhi, because everybody was very passionate in those days about the riots and the division of the country and things. And so that was a very convenient excuse to make. But even when there was none of those reasons to justify the murder, attempts had been made on Bapu's life. The earliest known attempt was in 1934 in Pune, when the Pune City Council had organized a function to felicitate Bapu. A hand grenade was hurled on his car. Bapu managed to escape because they hurled the hand grenade on the wrong car, and he arrived just seconds after the hand grenade exploded. And so some people were injured, but generally it didn't do what it was supposed to do. And at that time, even the Muslim League had not thought about Pune. The two-nation theory had not been promoted.
Not thought about Pakistan, you mean?
The seed of Pakistan. Nobody had thought about it. So Pakistan was a non-issue when the attack had happened. But at that time, Bapu had embarked on his Harijan Yatra, the emancipation of the untouchables. And he was traveling through Maharashtra, allowing access to the untouchables, to the community wells of the villages, and entry into the temples. And this had angered the Sanatani Hindus tremendously. That was the only reason that they would have attacked him in 34. So you must remember that this chain of events starts much, much earlier than 48 when it culminates. And 48 provides them with a justification to legitimize the act, saying that, they were patriots and they couldn't tolerate this. And even there, you see, if you look at the 20th, the attack on the 20th, you will realize that they are not committed to their cause. They still need a scapegoat who can be blamed for being a refugee. They're not going to, even then, they're not going to stand up and say, we are patriots. We thought Gandhi was harming the nation, and so we got rid of him. This whole dialogue has only happened in the last 10 years, when that entire, the radicalized Hindu thing has become legitimate in Indian society. Before that, they never stood up and said, we are patriots and we carried out the patriotic duty. And this is the hypocrisy of that ideology.
So Tushar, of course, there was a whole series of events, like you said, that started in 34. But as far as the 1948 attempt is concerned, the successful attempt on the 30th, what was the starting point of that conspiracy?
We don't know the exact starting point of the murder conspiracy. My theory is that it was in the works for a long time. There was a build-up of fanatic thought. Anti-Gandhi fanaticism was very well indoctrinated and promoted in the whole entire Savarkarite movement. One of the reasons for believing that is post the murder, Sardar Patel in a letter to the Prime Minister, writes that this was a fanatic faction of the Savarkarite loyalists who had planned and carried out the murder. And so the process was started much, much earlier. And there was a countrywide movement. There was a whole bunch of people who, in their own way, were promoting anti-Gandhi hatred in society. And this was being very systematically inculcated. This thought was being very systematically inculcated into the minds of people. You must remember that these conspirators, even today, the descendants of that ideology, the RSS and the Hindu Mahasabha in India, do not do anything instantaneously. It's always very well planned, and the objective is far into the future. They don't do anything that is to be instant kind of thing. If you even look at the demolition of the Babri Masjid, you can't pinpoint when they started that campaign, when the conspiracy actually began. It began much, much earlier, even before we remember. But the way it was orchestrated, till in 92 when it was demolished, it almost became legitimate. And they always work that way. And so it's very difficult to say when this thing originated, because the Kapoor Commission of Inquiry, which was set up in mid-60s to inquire into the larger conspiracy of it, comes across documents as 1.5 years before the murder, when meetings had taken place at different places in India to discuss the future. And in that, there are, feelers or hints of the launch to that whole attempt to subvert India in its infancy.
In fact, the Kapoor Commission, which probed the killing, mentions that leaders of the RSS and the Hindu Mahasabha met with the Raja of Alwar at some stage. So, where was this, and what exactly was the objective of this meeting?
Well, Alwar is a princely state in North Rajasthan. It was a well-known fact that the Hindu princes or kings of India were all almost inclined towards the Hindu right-wing thought and ideology in their own selfish self-preservation mode, because they believed that ideology would allow them to have their fiefs and their titles and their power, which the egalitarian Congress, they knew that it was never going to allow them to remain that way. So they were all in the self-preservation mode. In the Kapoor Commission's inquiry, they have talked about the conspiracy with leading players from 5 of the principalities, Kota, Bharatpur, Baroda, surprisingly, but Baroda is mentioned, Alwar is mentioned, Gwalior is very prominently mentioned in that, and it is said that they were all at Alwar to discuss the future of India with the leaders of the Mahasabha and the RSS, in which Savarkar and Golwalkar, who were the ideologues of the two parties, were present, and Nathuram Godse, the murderer, was also present, and Parchure, who was the gun supplier from Gwalior, was also present at that meeting. And it was decided that Gandhi's murder would be the signal to launch a nationwide revolt to overthrow the government of the Congress. And then a council of the Hindu princes would take up power, and they would be headed by the 2 patriarchs of the RSS and the Hindu Mahasabha, and a Hindu Rashtra would be established with the Manusmriti becoming the constitution of the new thing. So this was one of the points on which we can pin the murder. If you were to believe Nathuram, who in his testimonies later in the courts suggested that he did it out of a fit of anger, then he claims that it was on the 12th of January when Gandhi announced his fast unto death for peace in Delhi, and also to pay Pakistan the 55 crores of rupees that he lost it and he decided that now this man has to die. But that again is a very convenient excuse to make to justify all the arguments that were going to be made during the trials, to justify the murder and show how patriotic these people were, even though if they were to be branded as carrying out a bad act, the bad act was in a patriotic fervor. So it was being legitimized. And for that, this whole thing about the 12th and the 55 crores and the partition and everything was cooked up.
As far as the meeting with the Raja of Alwar is concerned, that's in the Kapoor Commission, right? So that's just so that the listeners know, the Kapoor Commission was set up to inquire into the conspiracy behind the assassination. So, that based on...
No, the actual reason for the appointment of the Kapoor Commission was because after the release of Gopal Godse and Vishnu Karkare and Madan Lal, who were serving a life sentence, they were felicitated in Pune at the public reception by the Hindu Mahasabha. And in that meeting, Tilak's grandnephew, he alleged that everybody in Pune knew about Nathuram's plan much in advance, and he claimed that he and some others had actually warned the government of the day about this conspiracy and asked them to protect Gandhi and all that. And when these things were reported in the press, there was a huge UN furor in the Assembly of Maharashtra at that time, and the government came under severe criticism and attack even from their own parties in both the Assembly and the Parliament. And so finally the Union government decided to set up a commission of inquiry, and a senior Congress minister was initially appointed as the chairman, who conducted the first few hearings of the commission. But then he was promoted to become a union minister, and so he quit his post as the commission chairman, and a retired justice of the Supreme Court, J.L. Kapoor, was appointed in his place, and that's why the commission came to be known as Kapoor Commission. And the Kapoor Commission was, the things that they discovered were astonishing. The problem was that they had been given a very restrictive purview of what they were supposed to look into. And although they unearthed much, much more than that, they couldn't legitimately put all that into their final conclusion because they just had 3 points to make a final conclusion. So, although all these things are mentioned in their investigation papers, when you look at the final report, they've been restricted and they just mentioned the 3 points which they were asked to question. So the final report of the Kapoor Commission isn't important, but the proceedings of the Kapoor Commission are startling and astonishing.
So Tushar, we'll come back to the Kapoor Commission in the episodes to come, because I know there's a lot to talk about as far as its investigation is concerned, as far as its proceedings are concerned. But I want to stay with this meeting with the royals, and what subsequent actions did the Rajas of Gwalior and Alwar take? For example, we've heard that the Raja of Gwalior gave a check of 7,000 rupees to Godse, and 7,000 rupees in those days was a very large amount.
I'm sorry to contradict you, Ashraf, but the amount was not just 7,000 rupees. It was a check of 60,000.
My God, that's a fantastic sum.
That's a fortune of that time. But coming back to your question, and this is documented, that the Raja of Alwar opened up his armory for Godse, who at that meeting, at the conclusion of that meeting, it was decided that the entire conspiracy of the coup that was to be launched, its launching signal would be the murder of Mahatma Gandhi, Bapu. And Nathuram Godse would be the murderer. And so subsequent to that, the Raja of Alwar opened up his armory to Parchure and Nathuram and asked them to take whatever weapons they wanted. And the Raja of Alwar actually provided them with a Mauser. The Mauser was supposed to be a very efficient pistol, which also turned into a rifle, a marksman's rifle, because it had a collapsible stock, which if you put it on, it became like a rifle with a shoulder thing, and you could take a long distance shot with that. the Raja of Alwar also provided his military trainers to train this group of murderers in the use of weapons and explosives. They underwent a training camp in Alwar territories in the forests. The Maharaja of Gwalior also provided similar help. I told you about the money that was provided. And notably, you must know that the murder weapon came from Gwalior. I will narrate the story of the murder weapon later on.
We will talk about that murder weapon. I think there's a big story there in the episodes.
There's so many stories.
And just for the listeners again, I mean, if you could just say who Parchure was.
Parchure was a doctor from Gwalior, but also the supremo of the Hindu Mahasabha and a band of marauders that he controlled, the Hindu Rashtra Sena, who were very fanatically loyal to Savarkar. Parchure was fanatically loyal to Savarkar. There is a whole story about that. It also deals with the gun, but over here I don't want to jump the gun.
We'll come to
that.
Again, in keeping with Alwar, this is a strange story that I read, and I think which I've heard you narrate also, is that it was in Alwar on the day that Bapu was eventually killed, January 30th, 1948, that a handbill was distributed hours before the murder, and that handbill announced the murder and implored citizens to celebrate it. This is curious, sir. What does it imply?
You must remember that Alwar was the hotbed of anti-Gandhi campaigns and hate, and the Prime Minister of the Maharaja of Alwar himself vociferously spread hatred against Gandhi. He is known to have publicly proclaimed that as a Brahmin, he was putting the Brahmin's curse on Gandhi, and he would not survive, and even after death, he would rot in hell. He also implored people to chop Gandhi into pieces and feed his flesh to crows and jackals. This is documented. This is all documented. And the most astonishing thing is that on the afternoon of 30th January 1948, a handbill was publicly distributed in Alwar proclaiming that Gandhi had been murdered and imploring its citizens to celebrate the murder. You must remember that murder happened hundreds of miles away from Alwar at 17 minutes past 5 in the evening. And there's a big time gap between the announcement of the murder and the actual murder happening. The other very astonishing fact is that when it was investigated, it was found out that the handbill had been printed in a press in Amritsar. So it's not just a coincidence. These kind of materials were prepared nationwide long back, and they were very systematically being created and distributed. The problem was the execution was faulty. And so again, Alwar jumped the gun and sent out, but because it was insulated, it was still not amalgamated into the system as such, that the news couldn't go out of there. But you must also remember that most of the shakhas of the RSS and the Hindu Mahasabha were told to listen into the news on 30th January for a big announcement, await that, and be prepared to celebrate it. And there were spontaneous celebrations nationwide within minutes of the announcement of Bapu's murder in the offices of the Sangh and Hindu Mahasabha. And so all these reactions or all these actions or events that happened in that suggest that the conspiracy was very, very well planned, orchestrated and programmed, and people were prepared to play their parts in that, in executing it and in the post-murder. The celebrations were also not spontaneous. You must remember this, Ashraf. The celebrations were not spontaneous too. They were orchestrated and ordained. People were told what to do, how to celebrate, how to rejoice, how to make a public display of it.
And again, this is documented in some form or the other.
Absolutely documented in many places, not just the great-grandson claiming this. I, as a matter of fact, whatever I say over here, can be found in documents that are independent of even my book. Although the entire Kapoor Commission's report proceedings that I have reproduced in my book mention the paragraph numbers that are original from the Kapoor Commission's proceedings and reports. So not even those are my own creation.
So while we are on the subject of your book, and for listeners, I'll take the name of the book. It's called Let's Kill Gandhi. There's a very interesting story about the murder weapon. The gun used to kill Gandhi has a history rooted in World War II and a journey that spans Europe, Africa, Gwalior, and finally that fateful day in Delhi. It's a gun that has a story that was first fascinating and then evil. How did it go from the sandy battlefields of Africa to the palm of Nathuram Godse? It's a Beretta semi-automatic, that's well known. But very few people know that the gun has a link to Mussolini, Eritrea and Gwalior. Could you expand on that? Because this is a very strange and curious sort of a link.
Yes, it is. The story of the gun is very astonishing. It was made in Italy and by the Beretta company in Italy, which was specifically made for the senior officers of Mussolini's army and given to them at the beginning of the Second World War when Italy joined the Axis and invaded northern Africa, Ethiopia and Eritrea in particular. The officer carrying this gun with him went into battle over there, and there the Allies, which was the British contingent protecting Eritrea, fought against them and defeated Mussolini's army. And when Mussolini's army surrendered, they were defeated in this particular battle by the platoon or the division provided by the King of Gwalior. It was the Gwalior forces, the Gwalior army, that actually defeated Mussolini's army, and the chief of that army surrendered to the chief of the Gwalior army. And as it is the tradition, he surrendered. The icon of that surrender was his personal firearm, which was given to the chief of the Gwalior army. So it was a trophy, war trophy of victory. And that counts a lot for army people. It is like in the old days they used to take the sword of the defeated enemy. This was the weapon of the defeated enemy, so it was a trophy.
It's a final act of surrender almost.
Yeah, it is subjugation, if you... yes, and that officer carried it back to Gwalior in triumph. So he was a hero, coming back with a war trophy of the victory. And as it was, that no matter how many soldiers died or sacrificed their lives to achieve a victory, the final, credit for the victory would go to the king, because they were his soldiers in any case. And so it was the king's triumphant thing. And the officer who came back from that war, carrying that gun, became the ADC of the king of Gwalior. After this, he joined the service of the King of Gwalior, and right till 48 he was serving in the court. Now an ADC, is like a shadow of the king. He even stands by when the king is making love to his queen. So he's that inseparable. What I meant to say was that he's that inseparable. So he knows everything that happens. And the king knows everything that his ADC does. And so there is no reason to believe that the ADC was impoverished or could not keep that war trophy so he so cherished that he carried it from the battlefront back home to suddenly go into the hands of a gun runner in Gwalior and from there reach the assassin, murderer, Nathuram Godse via Parchure, Dr. Parchure, just 2 days before the murder. Till then, they did not have a gun. They were determined to carry out the murder. They didn't have a weapon. I don't know whether they had decided to shower flowers on Bapu and kill him by smothering him in flowers or what. But till 2 days before the murder, they did not have a weapon. And this gun, if you look at gun historians, you will realize that this particular model of the gun has a name, has a nickname to it. Even today, it's known as the fascist special because it was made for Mussolini's fascist officers in his army. And it's very ironic that today's fascists used a fascist special to murder Bapu, who had become a thorn in their flesh. So the gun story is very interesting and one of the dark subjects of the Gandhi murder, because the journey of the gun from the palace of Gwalior to the gun runner has not been investigated at all. It's very surprising because when a murder, assassination of this magnitude happens, everything is investigated threadbare. And yet in the Gandhi murder, we only know that Goyal, Jagdish Goyal, who was a known arms black marketeer in Gwalior, sold the gun through Deshpande, who was Parchure's assistant. And Deshpande supplied it, gave it to Nathuram. We only know that, but there is a big question mark on how the gun travelled from the palace to Goyal, the arms trader. And then coupled with that there was a check that was given by the palace to the murderers also. It gives a very interesting connotation to the whole thing. We are not those kind of conspiracy theory people. And so when I also dug for this history, this entire history of the gun, I had to make special efforts to find out. Before my book, nobody knew that the gun was actually known as a fascist special. And so there is, at every aspect, there is a very interesting history, and there is a very big curiosity about the grey and black aspects in those stories.
This is fascinating, Tushar. Where is this gun stored now?
The gun is kept in the National Gandhi Museum, which is opposite Rajghat in New Delhi. I handled that gun. I was always very curious about it. After the court case and the sentencing and the execution of the accused, convicts rather, all the things associated with the murder which were presented in court as evidence were handed over to the government by the court with the instructions that they should become the protectors of that memorabilia, and if they desired, it could be a museum could be created, and those would be displayed over there, and that's where the Gandhi National Museum came into being. And all these things were given to the museum. So the blood-stained clothes that Bapu was wearing on the day of the murder are kept over there and exhibited over there. The bullets recovered from Bapu are also displayed over there. The gun is not displayed but is kept in, say, a lock and key in the vault of the museum. In 1998, when I immersed the urn containing Bapu's ashes that I discovered in Orissa, I went to the museum to hand over the urn to the museum because all the other urns containing Bapu's ashes are also displayed in the museum, and I wanted that this urn also should be displayed over there. So I went to hand over the urn to the museum, and that time I requested the director to show me the gun. And so he took it out of the vault, and I actually held that gun in my hand. And let me tell you, Ashraf, that gun had an evil aura. Because as soon as that gun came into my hand, the first thought I had was that if there was a Sanghi in front of me, I would shoot him. And then I was filled with horror at this kind of a thought. Even the thought horrified me. And I put the gun down and I said, no, this is evil. I don't even want to be in contact with it. So that was an episode in my life where, I generally laugh at people who say there are vibrations and aura and entity of things and they affect you and all that. I silently laugh in my mind. But I have experienced this in my own self. And I still believe that that gun is evil and it should never be displayed or shown to people. So it rests in the vault at the Gandhi National Museum. A few years back, there was reports in the press that had been stolen from the Gandhi National Museum. But no, it still is safe and sound and in lock and key in the vault.
Fascinating, Tushar. There is, you've actually given us a lot of things, a lot of fascinating things and thoughts. But there's another story that I find really fascinating that I heard you tell earlier. And I don't know if it's in your book, but it's a story about Gandhi's grandniece, Manuben, chancing upon Godse, staring at Gandhi while he was sleeping. And this is just before the killing. And could you retell it for us?
On the morning of the 30th, when Karkare, Apte and Godse, the three principal accused number 1, 2, 3 in the charge sheet of the Gandhi murder, had assembled in Delhi, all three of them were apprehensive that police from Mumbai or Pune or Ahmednagar would be positioned at the Birla House to who would recognize them if they made an approach to enter Birla House. And so Apte and Karkare decided to go and scout out Birla House and to see if they could spot any familiar faces. And so what they did was they walked on the opposite side of the road, the Albuquerque Road, and in the lanes that surrounded Birla House, where there were entry and exit points into the Birla House, to ensure that there were no sentries who could recognize them. Nathuram also had this doubt, so unknown to the other two, he went on his own and he entered Birla House. And like many other people, Birla House was open. At least the part that the Gandhi entourage was occupying, the 3 rooms on the ground floor that they were occupying were open spaces for everybody, and people used to walk in. Even strangers would come in just to take a glimpse of Bapu, and Bapu's entourage was very accustomed to such happenings. So Manuben in her diary writes about this instance that as was his practice, around noon, between 11 and 12, Bapu's cot would be kept in the garden of the Birla House, just adjoining his room. And he would lie down in the sunshine over there, absorbing the sun heat in the winter of Delhi, and sleep over there. And that time, everybody used to keep away from him to allow him to rest in peace. And but Manu would, from time to time go to check if nobody, that nobody was disturbing Bapu's rest. And she writes in her diary that a young man came into the rooms and she found him loitering in the rooms. And they got into a conversation, and he kept asking her about Bapu's habits and what he did and who he met and things like that. And after some time, Manu had other work, so she said, please, I have to go, and she excused herself. And then when she came back to check on Bapu, she discovered that this young man who had been talking to her was standing at the head of the cot, gazing down at Bapu. And to her it felt like he was in a strange kind of trance, fixed with a fixed gaze at Bapu. And when she looked at his face, she found that the expression on his face and the gaze were very like a raptor looking at his prey kind of thing. And she was disturbed by it, and she thought that this guy might just end up disturbing Bapu. So she slowly walked up to him and tapped him on his back. And she said, she told him that, Bapu was resting, don't disturb him. And she said, he gave a start as if he was coming out of a deep trance. And without uttering a word, he walked off from there. This has also been reported in the Kapoor Commission. It's not just Manu's record or imagination about it. In the inquiry at the Kapoor Commission, also this has been established that Godse was there. And the conclusion in the Kapoor Commission was that at that point of time, Godse wasn't carrying the gun with him. But the real reason is that the plan was to kill Gandhi at the prayer meeting. And so it wasn't executed even when Nathuram had all the opportunity to kill him, because the instructions, you must remember, Nathuram was the killer. He was not he did not concept or conceive the murder. He was just carrying out the orders he was given. And the orders were to kill Gandhi in his prayer meeting, to associate the murder with the prayers as it was planned much in advance.
Tushar, very few people know that was actually the second meeting between Gandhi and Godse, and there had been one earlier in Pune while Gandhi and Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel were undergoing a nature cure. So tell us about that meeting.
This was in 46. Bapu was very concerned. If you look at, when Bapu was released from the Aga Khan detention, and the pace of Indian independence started gathering steam. If you look at the correspondence between Bapu and Sardar Patel, you will notice that the opening of letters from Bapu to Sardar Patel were always expressing concern about Sardar's health and Sardar admonishing him for neglecting his own health. And in 46, Bapu was told that Sardar was critically ill, and yet he was not, he kept making excuses saying that there's too much work and I can't break away from it. So finally, Bapu sent him a command and said, you give up everything and you come to Pune. I am going to be there at the Nature Cure Hospital and I am going to supervise your cure and your health. And you will not be allowed to leave without my giving you a clear...
It's almost paternal.
It was absolutely paternal, and Sardar obeyed. And so both of them checked into the Nature Cure Hospital of Dinsha Mehta, Dr. Dinsha Mehta, who was Bapu's physician also. I know of this story because my grandmother and my father, who were staying with Bapu at that time, also went to the Nature Cure Hospital along with him. So they were witnesses to the events over there. And this story was later on narrated by my grandmother herself. And so I came to know about it. And it goes that one of those days while they were there, in the mornings, a youth came up to the Nature Cure Hospital and made inquiries about how he could meet Bapu. And he was told that Bapu is busy with administering to Sardar Patel and he can't be disturbed. So if you want to meet him, you'll have to wait, or you can leave a message and we'll convey it to Bapu. Now this guy was carrying a big basket wrapped as a gift. So after waiting a few minutes, he got impatient and he told my father, who was loitering around over there, that he couldn't wait any longer, but he wanted to give this gift to Gandhi. But the condition was that the gift should only be opened by Gandhi or in his presence. Nobody else was to open it. And my father said, yes, if you want to give a gift to Bapu, he will open it. Why should anybody else open it? So the guy left the basket and went away. Now, my father was very excited because it was a very attractively wrapped gift, big basket and things. So as soon as Bapu got free, my father ran up to him and told him that, some friend of yours came and left a gift for you and, I'm very eager to know what is it. But you are supposed to open it, so will you please open the gift? And Bapu said, okay, bring it to me. And then he told my father, Arun, open the basket. To everybody's horror, when the basket was opened, it was found to contain torn and old footwear. And everybody was quite disturbed because this was an insult to Bapu. And they thought that there would be a retort from Bapu also. But Bapu smiled. And he said, oh, what a precious gift. And my father said, what are you talking? Torn footwear, useless stuff. And it's an insult. So Bapu said, I want you to do something. He said, go with your elder cousin and go and sell this footwear in the used scrapyard and bring me the money. So my father and his cousin, they carried it to the scrapyard and sold it to the kabadi wala. And in that time, they made something like 3 or 4 rupees for it. No, not at all. So they brought it back to Bapu and Bapu said, okay, now go and deposit it in the Harijan Sevak Fund as a gift from an unknown friend. So they did that, and they thought that was the end of the matter. That evening in the prayer meeting, which was open to public, Bapu made an announcement saying that a dear friend gifted me a very precious gift today. And I sold it and I made money out of it and I deposited it into the Harijan Sevak Fund. Unfortunately, the friend did not reveal his identity, so I cannot thank him in person. But if that unknown friend is attending the prayers, he should identify himself. Or if somebody who knows who that friend was, they should identify him and convey my gratitude to that friend. Now, this young man who had gifted the basket was attending the prayers because he was expecting some kind of a rebuck from Gandhi or an angry response from Gandhi. But he got angry when Gandhi told him what had been done. So he stood up and he said, how dare you sell my gift off? Those things belong to me. There, you didn't have a right to sell the gift I gave you, and you give me the money, it's mine. And Bapu said, look, the only thing I'll give you is thank you, because you gifted it to me. I accepted the gift. It became mine. And what I do with it is my business after that. And now I've deposited the money into the Harijan Sevak Fund, so I can't retrieve it also and give it back to you. So all I'm going to do is say thank you. You're a very dear friend of mine, and thank you very much for your gift. Now, this guy got violent. He started abusing and shouting and things. So finally the volunteers took him away from the meeting. And then everybody in a few days forgot about the whole thing. And towards the end of 46 or beginning of 47, sometime in 47, my grandmother and father returned to South Africa. After Bapu's murder, when the news was announced in the newspapers in South Africa, and the photograph of the murderer was published in those newspapers, when my grandma saw the photograph, she immediately said, but this is the same man who had gifted that basket of footwear to Bapu. And that's how she identified Nathura. And so this is a very chilling example of the two philosophies, the philosophy of love, which forgave the insult and forgot about it and did not hold that grudge in their heart, and the ideology of hate, which continued to feed the flames of hatred in the person, which culminated in Nathuram killing Bapu. So I believe that this story is very pertinent to establish the psyche, the vicious, violent psyche of the Savarkarites of that time.
And there couldn't be two more distinct philosophies, and there couldn't be a greater example of who Gandhi was at the core, as you can judge from his reaction. Thanks, Tushar. With that, we come to the end of part 1 of this All Indians Matter special series. While we have discussed the conspiracy, who were the people involved? What role did each of them play? And what were their backgrounds and ideologies? We'll discover that in part 2. In the meantime, please visit www.allindiansmatter.in. That's ALLINDIANSMATTER.in for more columns and audio podcasts. You can follow me on Twitter at Ashraf Engineer. That's ASHRAFENGINER. And All Indians Count, that's ALLINDIANSCOUNT. Search for the All Indians Matter page on Facebook. On Instagram, the handle is All Indians Matter. Write to me at editor@allindiansmatter.in. Catch you again soon.